What's up? I'm Angie, and you are listening to Podcast That Pays, the podcast for online business owners who want to grow their business and sell their offers using podcasting. If you like no fluff, tell it like it is advice from a marketing-loving podcast agency owner, you are in the right place. So glad you're here. Let's dive in. Okay, so legit. Today, I have that Eminem song in my head. Guess who's back again. Angie's back. Listen, let me tell you, just by that song and the other song that I sang on my podcast, which was Britney Spears' Lucky, right? Can you just guess how old I am? Like, those songs give it away so hard what my age is and what era I grew up in. Anyway, so here's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about why people quit podcasting. I was doing some reels the other day, and they were about podfades. And if you don't know, a podfade, I think I talked about this before, but a podfade is when you just disappear off the face of the earth. Like, you just start your podcast and you get really excited, and everybody's like got these like beautiful graphics, and it's so fun and it's so great, and then nothing. And 75% of people become podfades. So when people ask me if podcasting is saturated, I'm like, hail to the nah, because 75% of the podcasts that you see are freaking fizzling out, or they're gonna disappear. So you still have lots of opportunity to stand out on this platform. And also, just to give you an idea, there's like 1 million podcasts versus 50 million YouTubes, and out of the 1 million, 75% are podfades. So you really got a good opportunity here to do something, but you have to set this up right. You have to, you got to know what you're doing from the beginning to be able to have this commitment to keep going. Okay. Now, why people quit, why people like end up in podfades. There's a couple different things, but I want to tell you this story about, I was writing this to my email list the other day because I'm about to launch my new course and I'm pre-writing a shit ton of emails. It's just, if anybody ever asks you what it's like to launch anything, it's just a bunch of fucking content strung together. It's just content. And I was on Instagram and I saw a post and it was like, don't underestimate the power of being in front of people. And I was like, shit, like more content. So I was writing this to my email list, and it was about this story of when I was younger. I thought that, like, it was such a brief moment that I thought this, thank God, but I thought that I could be a model. And this is because this is thanks to my mother, and my daughter talks about this all the time about, like, how moms have this, like, warped view of their children and think way more of their children than what they actually are. And I can say that this is true for my mom. Me and my sister sang in front of church all the time, and neither one of us can fucking sing. We sang the song by Sandy Patty, I think. I don't even know if that's a real name. But it was called Love in Every Language, and it was awful. Like, we were awful. So anyway, the encouragement of my mom, I think, made me think that I was like model-esque. So I remember one day, I was like, you know what? We're going to do a photo shoot. And Mom, you can take my pictures, which was like mistake number one looking back. My mom, I love my mom. God bless. But she is not a photographer, even to this day. So I decided to, because it was this special thing, I'm getting dressed up. I go into my sister's closet. I get this dress that is the snakeskin gray and black dress. It's so fucking cute. And I'm like, I'm going to put this dress on because this is a special occasion. This is like something different. I have to step it up. I have to be awesome. This is like exciting. So I get this dress. I get these shoes that are just too tall for me to maneuver in. And I go and I put makeup on. And my God, what is it with makeup that when you feel like you are doing something different, like gonna be a model for the day, you have to, it's like you lose your fucking mind about what works for your face and you're like trying more things. So it's like you are, putting on a different eyeshadow. I put on this like light gray ashy ass looking eyeshadow. I mean, looking back, the shit looks so ashy. And I put on, and then you just like, I don't know, I think my gloss was just glossier. I have caked on more makeup than I normally did. And it's like you do all these things outside of what you would normally do instead of taking the things that I'm comfortable with, taking the things that I'm used to, and just like doing those things and sticking with the shit that I know. My modeling photos would have come out so much better. And I literally have to go to my parents' house and dig out these photos and post them on social media or something, because then you'll understand what I'm talking about. So anyway, my photos would have came out so much better if I wouldn't had used this opportunity to experiment with what my core signature look was, because I looked fine. But I got all out the box because I was doing something special. And this is the same thing that happens to people when they start a podcast. It is so funny to me, and I'm so used to it because I've helped so many people with their podcasts, that I'm so very used to this, where people will come to me and they're like, yeah, I am a email strategist. I'm an email strategist. But for my podcast, I want to talk about how it's like dating in business, or how I want to talk about all the things. I want to talk about business. I want to talk about how, social media is affecting our businesses and how people don't sell. And I want to get a, round table of folks, and we're going to talk all about the things that happen in business that, that suck, or how to deal with clients. And I'm like, why? Like, why when it comes to your podcast? Like, why are people losing their minds? Like, why are people going and finding the dress that they never wore before, putting on the shoes that are not comfortable, trying out all the new makeup when they come to the podcasting platform? And I know why. It's because podcasting is sitting here, it's talking, you get to express yourself. People feel freer. But this, my friends, is one of the biggest mistakes that you can make when you're hopping on a new platform. It's one of the biggest mistakes, and for several reasons. Hey, if you're listening to this and you're thinking to yourself, I really need to up my podcasting game, or you want to start utilizing your show more for your business to get more leads and sell more offers, then I want you to come over to podcastthatpays.com and check out the Podcast Collab Lab. That's podcastthatpays.com, and check out what we're doing over there. I would love you to join us. Okay, back to the show. Okay, but one of the reasons, and the biggest reason that causes people to quit, is because this ain't going to do shit for your business. It ain't going to do nothing for you. And eventually you're going to get tired of your little side project. Which brings me to, so my point number one is, stop trying to do things so differently when you're thinking about doing your podcast. It really should be a platform that you're just doubling down on the shit that you know that you do well. This is how you start a podcast. And if maybe in the future you want to branch out and talk about how it is to date in your business and run a business, then God bless. God bless. Do it. But when you're starting out, please don't do that. Please think about the things that you do well. What is the thing that you do well? And we'll talk about more in this podcast, like my framework of how to create a podcast that pays. And one of the very first thing is your positioning. It's like how you position yourself in this podcast space, because it's important. It's very, very important. So don't try to do things differently. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. It's like the temptation that I had for this new course launch to go out and start my TikTok right now and grow on TikTok right now as I'm trying to do this. And I just quit, honestly. I just quit because I'm like, this is not the time to do something new. This is not the time to be trying to grow on a new platform. This is the time to double down on the platforms that I'm already doing well, that I already have established audiences, and just go in with that. Okay. So I'm so proud of myself for having the emotional intelligence, the EI. My coach Topsy would be so proud of me for saying, you know what, Angie, you can't do all the things. Let's just focus on the things that are already working for you, and let's double down on them. So that's my point number one, is that people try to go all outside the box. In my notes, I wrote down, like, people lose their minds. That's what I wrote down. So that's the number one point for me of why people end up quitting. And then that takes me to the number 2 point, which is, they lose their minds, and then they do too much. They're doing too much. You're doing too much. So now that we have decided that we want to talk about everything on our podcast, we want to explore the nuance of, writing an email on your iPad versus writing it on your computer, whatever. That actually would work for the person who is writing about email marketing. But anyway, so now that we've done that and we decided that, hey, we're going to open up and talk about everything, now what we do is we try to do everything. Now we go in and we're like, and let me tell you how many times I get this question: Angie, should I start a new Instagram for my podcast? No. How many, by show of hands, even though I can't see your hand, raise your hand, if you follow any podcast Instagrams or Facebook pages that you just love to follow, how many are there? Like, how many pages do you follow? How many Instagram podcast pages are you just so in love with, and you wake up every day and you just have to go see what they posted? I bet you it's not a lot. So if you don't like following them, what makes you think other people want to follow them? Because what people start to think is like, okay, I got this podcast, so now the way that I'm going to grow it is I'm going to have a whole new Instagram, and I'm just going to post clips of my podcast. Like, please, God, don't. I hate audiograms. And this is the reason why I hate audiograms, is because they're lazy. They are lazy, and they're ineffective in marketing most of the time. They're lazy because you just assume that you just take a clip from your podcast episode and you just plop it up on social media like a billboard, that people are actually going to be interested in that. And that's not the case. And sometimes this can be a good marketing technique to include. It would actually be much more effective if you videoed yourself while you were talking and you posted clips of you talking in video, not just behind a static image. But regardless, it's a lazy way of thinking that that's the way that you market your podcast. Now, if you incorporate that with a really good marketing plan, then fine. But this is why I don't like audiograms, and you probably won't see me ever post an audiogram. It's just because I just don't think it's valuable. And it's so funny because as I think about recording yourself while you're talking, I don't do that. Literally in this second, like, I wish somebody was recording me, because I am sitting in my closet on a pile of clothes, no less, that I threw in my closet to try to make my room look clean when someone came over. Sitting in my closet, butt naked, like with slippers on, fuzzy slippers, holding my iPad. I got orangutan boobs folding over my stomach right now. And like, this would actually be really entertaining. It makes me think of Celeste Barber, and like some recreation photo or video that she did. That's like how I look right now. But anyway, it would be quite entertaining to show you this, just to be honest. But not in love with audiograms, not in love with this like idea that you create this new Instagram and it's going to blow up and everyone's going to want to follow it. It's not true. It's just not true. People love people. People love interacting with humans and not just businesses and like audio clips. Like people don't like that. And so the most effective thing for you to do in this situation, just like it is for me in my launch, is to double down on what you're currently doing. So if you currently have an audience on IG, you don't need to break them apart for your podcast. That's your people who are going to listen to your podcast. I really, truly don't find a scenario where that's ever going to be necessary unless you have more than one podcast. Like I'm breaking away from my brand soon this year, meaning I'm creating a brand that's separate from Angie Jordan. So my brand is going to be this podcast brand. I don't even have a name, this media company brand where that's cool. I can have this podcast that pays podcast will be associated with that brand and not necessarily with me. And I may have plans myself to start a new podcast that's all about being a CEO. Okay. So in that instance, like my whole brand is moving over to another page and I am going to be separate from my brand. So in that case, cool. If that's something that you're doing, I'm doing this with the intention of me doubling down on being a business thought leader and not just all about podcasting. Eventually, this shit might not even happen this year because I want to make sure I'm focused on what I'm currently doing and double down on that. So, number one, you want to go all out the box, lose your fucking mind, think you're doing all this stuff differently, which you shouldn't. And number two, you're trying to do all the things that you shouldn't be trying to do. And so the reason why you end up quitting is because, number two, is you're doing too much. You're doing the most. It ends up being too much work. Okay? Ends up being too much work. And the first reason, you're doing things so differently that it's not going to drive any business to you. It's not going to drive traffic to your current business. So it's like a side project. It's like a side hustle without the hustle part, without the money part. So you're doing this side passion thing, and that's fine. Some people like to do that, but you have to be really honest with yourself. Like, am I going to be okay if I'm doing this podcast and only 25 people come? Am I going to be okay if I do this podcast and no one ever like is converting into my business? And am I going to be okay if I don't even know if people are converting to my business or not? Which is my third point. They don't make any money. They don't get the downloads they want. And it becomes a chore because, number one, it's their passion project. Number two, they aren't seeing the return. So, and there's several reasons why you're not seeing the return. Two of them I listed above. And you're not making any money. You're not tracking to see if you're making any money, who's coming from your podcast. You can't even see because most people don't understand podcast analytics suck. Like you can look at your downloads, you can see like that they're listening in United States and Australia, but like who gives a fuck? Like that's not what I care about. I care about right now for my commercial, I'm leading people to a specific page on my website for a 3-day event that I have going on. Now, the way that I have it set up, I can go look at that URL, at that page, and I can see how many people are actually taking action on what I'm saying in my podcast. So what that makes me able to do is say, okay, my commercial's being effective. It's moving people to that page. Now, what's my conversion on that page? Right now, my conversion is absolute shit. It's like 9%. Now, I say absolute shit, but keep in mind that this is a new podcast, so I don't have a lot of data. So that might just be what a good conversion is for this type of medium, okay? And so what I do is I say go to podcastthatpays.com, and that's the only place that I drop that URL. And so I know that when people go there, that is from my podcast only, right? And so I can see who's coming from my podcast. And so I use a quick and easy URL so that people can remember it, because, and which we'll go more into, because a lot of people are doing other things while they're listening to your podcast, but they'll remember that URL so later they can just type it in, which happens a lot. And so that's why even tracking links that you put in your show notes is not the most effective way. It's like literally having this separate URL that you can tell people every time so that they remember where to go. So when they're watching Netflix later on and they see somebody on Netflix that started a podcast and they're like, oh yeah, I want to go check out Angie's, thing, whatever she said. And I remember she said, go to Podcast That Pays. They whip out their phone and they just type in podcastthatpays.com and they go there, right? You can't track that from a link. They're not clicking a link because they're not looking at a link, right? But anyway, that is something that we'll talk about further. But that is a big reason, a big thing is that you can't track what's happening. People don't set their podcasts up because they don't have the knowledge or don't understand. They're not like obsessed is the word I'm looking for, marketing like I am. And so I need to know every single data point that I can absolutely know. So now that I know I have these people, not only do I know that people are taking action, but I also know that maybe I need a better sales page or better copy so that my conversion can go up. Maybe it's the wrong offer. Maybe it's not the right offer to send them. I also now have captured them on my website. So when I go to retarget, now when I go to open my course, these people will get retargeted on other platforms with my ads about my course opening, right? So now I've actually captured them without having them on my email list, which that's something too that I get asked a lot. It's like, if I'm taking these people straight to my podcast, like straight to my offer, then how do I capture their email? And you don't need to. They're in your ecosystem if you're doing this right. So that's something else that we'll talk about completely. But the point of this is that they're not making any money. They're not seeing any progress. They're not being able to track and see how this is benefiting them. And so obviously it just becomes an extra chore, and it's easy for you to fizzle out. It's easy to quit. It's easy to quit when you're not seeing a return. Like, think about growing on Instagram, how hard that shit is. And everybody saying, do reels, one reel a day for 30 days. I can tell you that I've done that, and I'm very consistent with posting reels, and my growth is like a fucking snail. And which is why I wanted to go on TikTok, because I'm like, this is like ridiculously slow growth. And that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about here, except that it makes you want to quit. It makes you want to quit. And this is why people quit. So people get all up in their heads. They lose their minds. They think this is my chance to be a model. Please, God, I have to find these pictures. They think this is a chance to be the model. We want to talk about all the things, all the different things. Okay? That's no. If that's you, no. It's like, tell them, look, kid, like, don't do that. Okay. And then stop trying to do all the things. Stop trying to make it so separate. The most effective thing that you can do with your podcast is use it to double down on what you're already doing and incorporate it into everything that you're doing. So now as I'm looking at like creating reels on Instagram, I'm like, every single topic is going to come from my podcast topics. Every single thing. And then every call to action is going to go back to my podcast. Why? Because it's simplifying what I'm doing. Now I don't have to go and think about what I'm going to do for reels. I just can go to episode 1. What did we talk about in episode 1? We talked about like why you should be doing podcasting for your business, or what you're doing wrong with podcasting in your business. Okay, let me do like 3 or 4 reels about that. Then let me do 3 or 4 stories about that. Like, incorporate it into your business so that it doesn't feel like an extra thing, which once it starts feeling this extra big thing and it's not giving us any return, it's only natural that people are going to want to quit. It's only natural if you decide that you're going to do this IG, this Facebook page, do all this other shit, and then you don't see no return. that you're going to be like, this is dumb. It ain't that the podcast platform is dumb. It might be user error. Okay? Probably the same as what it is for my Instagram. So I ain't trying to drag you without dragging myself. But yes. So let's keep it simple. Let's stay on point, especially in the beginning. We can always grow and evolve with our podcast, okay? But in the beginning, stay very focused. Let's keep it simple. This is an extension of what you're currently doing. And let's figure out, which you will figure out if you listen to this podcast, how we're going to make money and track what we're doing and track our leads and understand how our podcast is contributing to our overall marketing strategy. And that's how you're going to have a winner. That's how it's going to make sense to keep doing for your business. That's how you're going to be able to generate leads and money and all the amazing things that you want from your podcast. Okay? So thank you for listening. Come over to my Instagram at Angie M. Jordan. I'm obsessed with people coming and dropping in my DMs, but also, hey, I want to grow my Instagram. So come over. If you like this episode, please share it with someone. I really appreciate it. Take a screenshot that you're listening and tag me on the gram. I love it so much. And I will talk to you in the next episode. Hey, if you enjoyed the show, head over to podcastthatpays.com to get started on your way to creating a podcast that pays. And don't forget to follow this show and take a screenshot that you were listening and tag me on Instagram at Angie M. Jordan. I'd love to meet you and show you some love over there. Thank you so much for being here. I love you. Let's get this money.